Well, good morning everyone and welcome back to the shop. Before we get started on today's challenge, and it's a big challenge, I just wanted to thank everybody for all of their recommendations as far as the fitment of the panels. It's very difficult as the person working on the car to stop, right? You can see it, you know, what does it take? Does it take another 10-15 minutes of sanding? Does it take another application of filler? You know, and you get to the point where you could chase that detail all day. I've decided, and again, thank you everybody for your feedback. I've decided I'm going to get the panels as close as I can get, but again, it is a driver. This car is going to be, you know, tens of thousands of miles, hopefully, over the next few years. It is what it is. It's going to get chipped. It's going to get scratched. It's a driver. So I'm going to stop short of that perfection. So thank you for that. Second shout out goes to Barry over at Joe Daddy's Garage. I saw him working on his media cabinet, and I thought, you know what, I've neglected mine for a whole year, and I thought, well, let me take a look inside. And sure enough, I was wondering why I was getting so much dust inside of the workshop when I was working. So the gloves were ripped and torn, right? Now that's just wear, right? You're in, your gloves are in, you're out. So those were burnt out. The second thing is I thought, okay, well, why don't I just empty all the media out of it? Well, it took about 3 buckets to hold all of the media. And then what I did is I resealed everything because there were leaks. I was getting sand on the floor. So I resealed everything, and then I got a very dense media strainer here, or in other words, a sieve, and I strained all of the sand, and I took out just garbage. And the reason is that if that garbage gets sucked up by the tube, it'll jam the gun, and that's why the gun wasn't performing very well. So now that I've rebuilt it, got it all set up, now I didn't do all the cool lights like Barry did. I mean, I've just got my little LED light that shoots in. I can see what I can see, but I got a little lazy there, so I didn't put any lights inside. But basically now the machine is working the way it was when I first got it. I have no leaks on the ground, so I'm not going to get a pile of sand on the ground. So that's number 2. Number 3, the term oil canning. Now, some of the individuals who are my age know this. I used to work at a place called Bill's Gulf, which is on Lakeshore by Park Lawn. It was my first job. I was 16 years old pumping gas. And every once in a while, you would have somebody who would need a quart of oil. So you would take a quart, remember, not liter, a quart of oil. And they were in a cylindrical container. And you actually had a spout that you stuck into that container, and you would pour it into the car. And while it was emptying into the car, you would get this unique sound of the back of the can popping as air would get in, and then it would vacuum it down, then air would pop. You would get this unique sound. And let's listen to that sound together. This is the sound. Now, either that's the intro to a fantastic album called Dark Side of the Moon, or unfortunately, that is my trunk. Now here's the challenge you get when you buy aftermarket parts. You can see I've made some circles on this hood. Now this one doesn't click, but it moves. Over here, same thing, it kind of clicks. You can hear it. It's not against the inner structure, and here it actually, same thing. Now, is there an upside to this? Now, if there is an upside to this, is that if I don't exert any pressure, if the trunk lid stays the way it is, it's actually okay. Like, I mean, this is not bulging up. So, at rest, this is good the way it is, right? A little bit of filler here and there just to flatten it, but I had to do that on my hood anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So now here's my problem. What do I do to stop the deflections in these corners? Well, let's take a look underneath and I'll show you what I mean. So now these 2 sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, the ones that are moving, this dent in here, if that was open, I think it would have been perfect. I would have been able to get some sort of a panel adhesive. So if I put my hand in here and hold the panel, you know, I can stop that panel from moving. So I need to get some adhesive, but this whole length. So how do I do that? How do I get adhesive down in here? So I'm thinking of using my cutoff wheel and trying to open up this trough just right at the bottom so that it allows me to then to get in there and fill it. I can do the same thing on the other side, and again, fill it. Hopefully that'll stop the panels from moving on that side. This one's going to be a challenge though. This panel, this whole area in here is huge. It's about that far away, as I said. So I'm thinking I'll just drill a bunch of holes in here and try to get adhesive, or even maybe I'm thinking of using one other product. For this large area where it's about that far away and the panel is, even if I cut holes in here, I'm not going to be able to bond it. I'm thinking of using an interior, exterior, low grow, which is important. It's a low grow, low expanding foam. And the reason is that if I can cut a few holes in here, pop some foam into this area, it'll fill the gap between the panel and the superstructure. And at the same time, I can monitor it as it grows to make sure it doesn't deflect the panel, and it should then adhere the panel to the superstructure and stop the movement. Now, I was thinking of using this even in here, maybe drilling this out and moving it in here, but these panels are so large and it's so close in here, I'm worried again, maybe panel expansion is going to move the panel. But in this area, I'm not too concerned because this is huge. I mean, that's a huge area that I've got to fill in. And so I think what I'm going to start with is just using my cutoff, coming in on the sides and trying to remove an oval area so that I can gain access to the panel. And then hopefully I've got, of course, my panel sealing, and maybe we can seal the panels to the superstructure and that'll stop the oil canning. Let's give that a try. Okay, so what I decided to do is just use my angle grinder and cut a straight line down the center. Now, because the panel, as you saw, I mean, the panel deflected, which means there was a gap between the infrastructure and the trunk lid. So I was able to cut that through. I did not go through on the other side, you have to believe me. But basically, what I'm going to do now is simply tap with a hammer and fold this in on both sides. That should then open this gap, which is only the thickness of my cutoff wheel, enough that I can put in my seam sealer. I mean, the seam sealer does a great job. In fact, they were skimpy on the seam sealer here as well. So I'm going to be putting some seam sealer in. I can also reach in here with my finger, so I'll put on some gloves, get some seam sealer, and get it in here as best I can. But as long as we can stop the panel from moving, I'm fine. And, you know, like I said, that's the last thing you want is any oil canning going on the panels. They should have been rigid in the first place, but again, this is aftermarket. So I'm just going to pound this open. We'll get some seam sealer in this thing, and then we're on to the foam. So hammered on the inside, hammered over here. I mean, there's going to be some dents in the middle. I'm not going to fill it. I mean, it's the trunk. But you can see I've opened up a gap. It's about 1/8 of an inch gap. And the panel still moves, right? There's our familiar sound. But I can now get in here, obviously put some gloves on, grab the panel adhesive and literally jam it all the way down in there so it spreads out. I'll put some in here, but that should solve everything. And that should then quiet this panel down. So I'm going to go on to that, finish this up, we'll get over to the foam. Okay. Sorry for the mess, but you know what, I got a little aggressive, but I wanted to. I actually was using my gloves and I was using the seam sealer and literally putting it on my finger and driving it into that gash that I had created, that I'd cut. Perfect though, because it went in, it's in contact. If I just touch the panel underneath, I can see it moving in the seam because it's only been 15 minutes, so it's not hardened yet. But the idea is that once this sets up, that panel's not going to move. Now, this should have been done when they manufactured it. I mean, they just needed to put a bead of panel adhesive between the superstructure and they would have been done, but they didn't. Same thing on the other side. I've already done that. So both sides of the panels are done. I stuck a little bit in here, put a little here, because all they did was put a couple of dabs here and there, and you can see it's not the greatest fitment. So this is one of the challenges. When you're buying something like this, I would suggest, and I didn't do the research, I would suggest to see if there are better quality options. This option wasn't expensive, and probably that's why it's got all these problems. hopefully if you buy one of these, you don't have these challenges, but if you do, hopefully I've given you some unique ideas maybe to fix those challenges. But like I said, in my case here, you know, I had to do this. The panels were moving. You cannot do body work if the panels are moving. So hopefully this is done. This area was a little unique. For this circle, which is a good 8 or 9 inch circle, there is no support. This superstructure does not bend down. It does not come in contact with the panel. So this panel moved regardless. I mean, nothing you could do, this panel is going to move. So this is a flaw. I say this is a flaw in manufacturing. So how do we make this panel under here not oil can, because there's nothing supporting it? Well, that's where I went to the low grow foam. Now that low expansion foam, as you can see here, it's already hardened up. But that's all that popped out, that little bit there. Because what I did is I drilled a hole here, I drilled a hole here, I put the gun in, I pulled the trigger, filled up this area here, and I put it in here, filled up this area here. And once the foam went in, it pretty well stops growing. I mean, it just grows during the initial insertion of the foam while it's still soft, which means it's not going to push panels apart. I think we're good. This whole area now has been supported. This is still flat. I don't feel this bulging anywhere here. So we're done. I'm going to let this set up overnight. Tomorrow I'll come in, I'll put it back on the car. I'll make sure first I'll make sure the panels aren't moving, but if they are not, I'll put it back on the car. I can start doing my seams. I can start doing all of the panel adjustment, get this exactly the way I want. And then once it's flat and I'm ready to go, and see if there's any filler that needs to go on it. Once that's done, I can take it back off. I'll come under here, I'll clean this up, use some acetone, maybe a Scotch-Brite, clean this whole area up, and then I'll shoot the whole thing in 2K, and the trunk is ready to go. And like I said, then it'll be ready for final body work, which is weeks away. But basically, if you've purchased a trunk lid and you run into this exact same problem, maybe I've given you some unique ideas to help solve those problems. I now hopefully have a trunk panel that's not going to move, but I won't know till tomorrow because the stuff's still wet. Until then, take care, and I will talk to you guys later.